Yeah, thanks everybody. Okay, into part one. Okay, so here's our brief impromptu part two Q&A. So let me scroll back up here. There was this one for sure, Scott, because we get a lot of contacts from small churches, and we know that there's not a lot of solid ministry resources out there. So I definitely want to touch on that. So this is might be an elephant in the room question: how big should a church be in order to have all five levels of leadership? This is from Nathan. They've got about 100 attendants weekly. And so he's thinking to himself, and Scott, you and I talked about this before we started the webinar. What does like the single pastor or single staff church do to begin to develop something like this?
It's a great question. So I would encourage, this is just Scott Ball's personal perspective. I think there might be some out there who might say, hey, just start with 4 and add 5 later. I would prefer you start with 5 and have maybe L4 leaders who function in a dual capacity, or an L5 leader who functions in a dual capacity initially. What I like to do is when I'm building out a a job description, is create a category on that job description that says carry for now, which means there are functions and roles that I am carrying right now in my role in our church of 100 people, that when I have a volunteer who's capable, or when we hire a new staff person or whatever, I'm going to offload some of the things that are in my carry for now category to that position. So what was the guy's name? Leader's name?
It was Nathan.
Nathan, what I would do, I really believe firmly in this coaching level, but I recognize that in a church of 100 people, that might just not be realistic at the moment. I would look at combining L4 and L3 at that size, but identify, is it an L4 person who's carrying L3 responsibilities, or an L3 person who's carrying some L4 responsibilities? And in either instance, put whichever one they're not really in, that they're sort of dual capacity, in a carry for now category, so that as the church grows, you're able to split out those roles. It goes back to that slide at the beginning where we said, build the leadership structure today that you're going to need tomorrow. I'm telling you from firsthand experience, if you try to create that coaching level later, you're very likely going to have to try and blow up some ministry, so to speak, in order to import it. So I'd say the earlier you can implement that L3 leadership structure with 5 levels total, the better. Even if you have some people serving in dual capacities for a season. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, hopefully so. Okay, so let me go ahead and touch on this. And again, this is part 2. We promised no sales pitch in part 1. Okay, I'm changing the rules now. So I just want to address this. Charles said not all small churches can afford to retain your consulting services. Is there a book or manual that covers this stuff in detail? So Scott, I'll let you speak to the book thing, but I just also want to say, Charles, call us, give us a call, and let's talk about what the needs are in your church, because we would hate for cost, or your perceived cost, to keep you from even talking to us about what can be done, because a lot of times there is low cost or no cost things that we can help walk you through, because our heart in ministry is to help you develop as a leader and help your church be the best that it can be. So don't think that you can't afford, or that there is even a cost to have a conversation with us. So that's my plug to Charles. Scott, what do you think about books?
Really, really like Aubrey's book, Building Leaders. It's by Aubrey Malphurs. He co-wrote that with Will Mancini. It is an underrated book. I'll say that. Like, there are a lot of flashy newer books that are out. Designed to Lead is one, but I really believe, and you could say I'm biased, but I have read a lot of leadership books, and frankly, I hope Aubrey's not listening to this. The Building Leaders book is my favorite of his books. It's the one I've read the most. I've probably personally read that book 3 or 4 times in the last couple of years. So it's a great book, and I highly recommend it. Like all of Aubrey's books, it comes with a mess of tools that you can recreate on your own or copy straight out of the book, and you can implement them. And again, that's just the cost of a book. So yeah, AJ's right. It's probably the leadership pipeline coaching is probably one of the most affordable things that we do. So from a cost level, don't think that maybe it'd be out of reach. But if you're like, trust me, we got no money, fine. I really recommend the Building Leaders book. It's very good.
That's really part of a trilogy. Being leaders, building leaders, and leading leaders are kind of a three-part, which really the books in themselves are sort of this levels of leadership in a kind of a general sense, and certainly speak to capacity.
What do we need to do to develop a leader? If you combine with the high-level overview that we just gave you, that'd give you a great jump start.
So let's see. Let me move on up here. So Derek had asked kind of early on that what he said is many people avoid level 3 roles. How can I help them embrace these opportunities?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would contend that there's very few level 3 roles ever offered. So that'd be number one. Number two, I'd say people who aren't level 3 leaders resist the level 3 role, which is right. So sometimes we go to the person who's been in the ministry the longest. So small groups is a great example. You know, someone who's been a small group leader or a Sunday school teacher for a long time, and we go, gosh, you'd be great at helping us manage this. And that often is just not the case. Like in a business example, oftentimes the person who gets promoted to sales manager is the best salesperson. And the thought process is if they're so great at sales, then they'll be able to help other people with sales. And that's just not true, because developing salespeople is a different skill than being a good salesperson. So I would contend that maybe the issue is usually in finding the people who enjoy coaching people, mentoring people, managing people, and look to promote those people to those roles, not someone who's necessarily been there the longest, is your best teacher or whatever. Those people often like to stay in doing what they're doing. Also, people you want to target. A church I worked with in Texas did this, and it was a great idea. He had people who were Sunday school teachers who were burned out on teaching Sunday school, but still had a heart for the ministry. And so they had quit teaching, and he kind of revisited them and say, hey, what about this role? And they were like, oh, I love this. Like, I love being able to work with the teachers and be able to pinch hit in a class if I need to, which scratches that itch without serving in that role.
Yeah.
So
I was thinking that when we were talking about this earlier, Scott, I think having maybe a next level leadership area is an incentive sometimes for people even to get in at the level 1, level 2 space. Because a lot of people, they desire a greater leadership capacity or greater leadership role. If they think there's nowhere to go, and they're like, I just don't want to be doing this task for the rest of my ministry life.
Yeah.
So I think it can be an incentive to even increase people at the bottom of this pipeline. Somebody had kind of compared this to a sales pipeline. It really is very similar to that. You're getting more people in, at the top of the funnel or however you want to envision it. So it can increase your volunteer group overall to have room for them to grow into.
Right.
Yep. So this is a kind of a specific question but a lot of churches they have this position. So Pat is saying here, do leaders maintain a dual role, like being a leader and still being a member of a small group, or you develop a leadership community that becomes a group of their own?
Yeah, that's a good question. Every church is going to have a different philosophy on this, and there's not a right or wrong answer. So I feel like I should preface that. I think that if you're and I believe this more on sort of just a personal health, emotional health issue. I feel like if you're the youth pastor, like you should be able to join a small group as a small group member, and not be just because you're on staff, you've got to be the one who's leading the small group. Like, I think it's good for your emotional health and spiritual health to be able just to attend and not have another thing that if I'm involved in it, I always have to lead. And I don't think that it's healthy for you to say, well, all of our staff are in a small group, because that becomes an echo chamber. and you're around those people all the time anyway. Like you need to get out and make some other friends, you know? So my personal perspective is you should, you know, if you're in a leadership position, you should join a group and be a part of it and not necessarily be forced to lead it, because you're leading a lot of other things. Good question.
Sarah had another kind of follow-up question. Is there a recommendation for the next levels to add after these 5?
Sorry, I was apologizing to Sarah.
Is there a recommendation for the next levels to add after these 5?
Yeah. So there's a church in Texas I was working with that we started with 5, and as we were continuing through the workshop, again, really not trying to do a sales pitch, but we're allowed to do that now. Is that right?
That's right. We're in part 2. This is
value of having
the after hours. Yeah.
This is the value of having somebody on site. We started with 5, and then when we got to the workshop part, we realized that they really had 6 levels of leadership. So what they ended up having in their specific instance was they had, because this was a church of roughly 1,000 people, somewhere in that neighborhood, they had a level 6 leader, which is that leading the organization. Then they had a level 5 leader, which in this instance was almost like leading ministry areas, worship, or like ministry functions, worship, discipleship, right? These sort of broader categories. And then they had, for them, what was level 4 leaders were staff who functioned in departmental roles. So you know, maybe had family, and underneath that, students, children, right? And then in preschool, you know, students, elementary, preschool. And you had staff who led those specific departments. So as a church grows, where the stratification happens doesn't happen within the volunteer level. It's almost always level 1, 2, 3, where the additional levels is in the complexity of your staff. So you might have multiple layers of staff. So that's the answer to that question.
And not likely to grow much beyond that. I mean,
would be upper level there.
Yeah, 7 is. I don't know if the video cut out there, but yeah, probably 7 is where you're going to max out. I mean, I don't know, 30,000 member church. You got your own things going on. I don't think anybody's on this webinar from
probably not.
Saddleback. So, okay, how about let's see. Let's talk about discipleship pathway versus leadership pipeline. Randy was wondering the relationship between those two, and I think that is an important thing to make sure nobody's confused about that.
Yeah. So when we talk about discipleship pathways, there are 5 fundamental questions that we cover in strategic envisioning. 5 that we say, you know, you need to be able to answer these 5 questions the same way. First question is, what is our mandate? What is it that we exist as a church to do, right? And that's your mission. Question 2 is, what motivates us as a church? What are our core motivations? Those are our core values. The third question is, how are we going to structure ministry to accomplish our mandate, right? How are we going to structure our ministry? And that's what discipleship pathway answers, is what are the steps that we believe someone needs to take, and therefore we're going to structure all of our ministries according to that pathway, to those steps, in order for that person to be healthy and be living out that mandate. So, for example, it might be 4 steps. I was working with a church in Richmond. Their 4 steps were come in, lean in, help out, go out. And so they believe that fundamentally, to be a mature believer, you need to be worshiping, you need to be a part of a group, you need to be serving using your gifts, and you need to be sharing your faith, right? Those are the 4 things that they believe. That's true for everyone in your church, whether they are an L1 leader or an L5 leader. That is how they have invited people to grow spiritually, is by taking those 4 steps. A leadership pipeline is simply about how are we growing leaders, increasing their character and capacity. So you can be a spiritually mature person, doing all 4 of those steps, and be an L1 leader. Does that make sense? Am I being clear? Randy, does that make sense? You can be spiritually mature and be an L1 leader. You can be spiritually immature and be an L1 leader. Where there's some overlap, a Venn diagram of overlap between spiritual development or discipleship pathway and leadership development, is that as you get higher up on the leadership levels, it's more important that you be doing all four of those steps. Does that make sense? If spiritual maturity becomes like a requirement for going further up the pipeline. So, Randy, I hope that answers the question.
And this sort of connects to that. So Sam asked, how do you promote a leadership pipeline while avoiding the perception of it being a ladder to be climbed?
That's a good.
Well, I guess first of all, let me say, I'm not sure you don't necessarily promote a leadership pipeline. I mean, this becomes a culture of the church. It's not an advertising piece, join the leadership pipeline. So in that respect, a lot of people may not even perceive the leadership pipeline of the church, although it's there and functioning well. So, but it definitely, I don't know, Scott, what are your thoughts on whether people fully understand what the next level is? Somebody within the leadership pipeline should understand who do they report to, who is underneath them. Yep. But it also simply has to be understood as well. There's only so many positions, and they get fewer as you go up. So that has to be understood.
You said that really well. So again, this is something we didn't have time to go into, but when in our longer training, we talk about there's three approaches to leadership development. One is organic, which means, we'll just take the leaders as they come, which is what most churches do. Second is programmatic, like we're going to build leaders. We're starting Leadership Pipeline University at our church. And leadership development exists as like its own ministry, which is not sustainable, because when the person who started it or runs it goes away, or the funding for that goes away, or the passion for that goes away, it breaks down. You can produce leaders that way, but it requires a lot of effort, a lot of money, and a lot of attention. What we're advocating for is what I call systemic leadership pipeline. Systemic leadership development, where we embed a leadership pipeline structure into everything that we do. So what you wouldn't want to do is have our worship ministry and our children's ministry has levels of leadership, but our hospitality ministry and our student ministry doesn't. It won't work. You have to embed it. So AJ said it exactly right. To the outside, all we're communicating is join a ministry. And here are the leadership opportunities for you. And then once you're in that ministry, you understand this is how the ministry is structured. People don't care when they first join a church, like what is the organizational chart of this ministry? That's just not something that's on their radar, and it's not something that you would promote. You're right, though. One legitimate fear is when you roll it out for the first time, there is going to be this, like, well, this is different. I used to report to Jim as a staff person, and now you're telling me I need to report to Seth. Well, how can I be having what Seth is doing? And, that can happen when you're first rolling it out. And you just manage that by doing it slowly. So I always tell a church it's going to take a year to a year and a half, 12 to 18 months to roll this out. And the way you avoid that problem is clear communication over the long term. Don't say we're ripping the Band-Aid and implementing 5 layers of leadership overnight. That is a quick way to get people upset. So do it over the long term.
That's great. So this person asked, this was kind of an anonymous question. Can't give you a name.
Okay.
What do you suggest for people that have been leading or are strong volunteers but cannot make the time or the priority to be developed in the pipeline?
Well, I would ask there are two things. Number one would be, are they overworked? Generally, if I have a leader who doesn't want to be developed, it might be because they're serving in 3 different ministries. And if that's the case, then I need to pare down how much I have on them so they're only serving in one area, so that I can give them the margin to be developed. Number 2, leadership development ought not demand that much time. So when we talk about assessing and mentoring, I'm talking about once a quarter, like once every 3 months, getting together. And so I talk about mentoring and assessment. And again, this goes into what we would talk about in a longer setting, but try to partner those things up. So I don't have a mentoring meeting 1 month and then an assessment meeting another month. No. I can do those things at the same time. I can assess them and build into them at the same time. So hopefully a volunteer would have the margin for one mentoring coaching meeting a quarter, once every 3 months. And then if you were to do a training event, for example, you might do 2 or 3 of those per year. So I would say, number one, they might be over-serving, so we need to scale back the responsibilities. And 2, we should over-program so that we're demanding too much of them. And then if that's still too much, then they're not ready to be a leader.
Yeah.
Make that time, and the time expectation is realistic, then they're just not ready to be a leader.
Or do they even have an interest in moving up from where they are? Do they just absolutely love where they're serving, and that's just really all they want to do? And if that's the case,
and just stay a greeter,
let them be great.
Yeah,
let them be great where they are. I think that kind of wraps us up. Man, thank you for a lot of people stayed on. You guys are champions. You guys are the diehard, really want to lead well. So kudos to everybody that stayed on 25 minutes after a webinar to be able to participate and ask questions and be, hear the benefits of the answers for other people. So you guys are awesome.
Interested in, what is that one-on-one, like bringing one of us in, work with your church one-on-one? I'll just say it's a lot more affordable probably than you think it is. So if you have interest in that, email leadership@malthersgroup.com and we'll follow up with you. Because it is a tough thing to do alone. And just so you know, we work with you over 2 days, two full days, and then we follow up with you for a year of coaching to implement that. 5 or 6 different follow-ups over the course of 12 months. So if you're interested in learning more about that, since we're in part 2 and we can say that, email leadership@malthersgroup.com and we'd be happy to tell you more about it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everyone for being on. We appreciate you. We will have, so this is December. This is our 4th month in a row that we've done webinars, and we are planning amongst ourselves at this time for what we were going to be doing as the new year kicks off. So be watching your email for the next series of webinars that we'll be starting. We're going to keep this going because we're getting some great feedback that this is a blessing to your ministries, and that's what our goal is to be here at the Mount First Group. So thank you so much. We appreciate you. God bless you all, and we will see you in the new year. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Love you guys.